computer. So yesterday we spoke about the weaknesses of the documentary hypothesis. And as I mentioned, this hypothesis was very popular until the middle of the 20th century. But starting even later, I would like to say. But today, it is not accepted as it was used to be accepted in the past. So scholars today understand that this reconstruction of the history is not working very well, and it is impossible to apply it to all the situation of the all the passages of the Pentateuch. And I don't want to speak very much about the modern state of affairs, but what I want to say that usually there is no consensus, not usually, but there is no consensus among the scholars about how the Pentateuch came into existence. So most of the modern theologians are liberal theologians, so they do not believe in the inspiration, God's inspiration, and they do not believe that the Pentateuch was written by Moses. But they today, in our days, suggest many different hypotheses about how it was composed or how it was written. And maybe some of them, the most famous, those people like Van Seters, he's American, so probably he is pronounced now as Van Seters. Thompson, Rentorf, Bloom, and Whybray, all of them suggested many different, so they suggested different models of the origin of the Pentateuch. Van Seters and Levin advocate a modified documentary hypothesis. Rendorf and Bloom favor a supplementary model, and Whybray favored a fragmentary model. So do you see, all of them just divided and suggested different models for the origin of the Pentateuch. And some of them are very liberal. For example, this guy, Van Seters, he wrote several books on the Pentateuch, and what he advocates that the Pentateuch in its final form appeared very late. So he says about Hellenistic period, so this is about 300 BC, and he says that the traditions described in the book of Genesis fit much better at the Hellenistic period than any other period in the history. So do you see, this is very liberal theories, and just because people do not believe in the divine inspiration, they made up many theories, but of course they I would like to say this is a garbage, this is a trash, but unfortunately most of modern theology is about things like this. But this is the only topic when I touch those issues, because I understand when you read books, when you read articles, you will encounter some of those ideas. So this is Van Seters. Or Bloom also suggested also very liberal theory. The earliest elements are found in the stories of struggle between Jacob and Esau and between Jacob and Laban. Bloom dated them to the time after David subjugated Edom. So do you see, he says that most probably these stories about Jacob and Esau can be dated to can be related to David when he conquered Edom. The co-portion was expanded by, so this, he believes that this was the basic story, yeah. And do you remember he favored supplementary model. So he says that this story about struggle between Jacob and Esau was the basic story, and this story was supplemented later on by different other stories. The scope portion was expanded by the addition of other stories in Genesis 27:33. Then the stories about Jacob and Joseph were added. These stories are concerned about the northern tribe, Joseph, and about southern tribe, Judah. This points to a period when Judah was asserting its supremacy over the north. For example, the reign of Josiah. The stories about Judah were circulating in the southern kingdom. The Pentateuch was edited by the Deuteronomistic historian. So Deuteronomistic historian is another theory. It is another liberal theory about the origin of the books from Deuteronomy to 2 Kings. But we will not touch it in our course. Just remember that this is also another liberal theory that exists in theology. Okay, and now we will speak about another topic. So if you have any questions about the modern state of affairs, please go ahead, you can ask, and I will try to answer. Yes, please, Pastor Ephraim. Go on.
All right, thank you, sir. I want to ask a question. This hypothesis that we just looked at, their weaknesses and what have you, help me. I want to situate, how do all of these theories can be applied either positively or negatively in the pastoral ministry, for example?
Okay, yeah, thank you for your question. So they cannot be applied to a pastoral ministry at all. Because we as Adventists believe in divine inspiration, and we believe that Moses wrote Pentateuch. So the only reason why I mention and why I start with those liberal theories is because you as master students will be exposed when you read a literature on Pentateuch. You will be exposed to many different opinions. So just understand it as a vaccination against those liberal opinions that exist in this world. Okay, so we cannot apply it. Sorry that we spent our time on this, but as I said, when you open any book, almost any book, if it is not written by the conservative scholar, and as I said, you will be exposed to such literature. So you will find some ideas of these theories, and you need to understand why it happened. So why they believe like this, why they explain Pentateuch like this. So that is why we speak about these theories. And as I said, we will just spend yesterday and today about this, and we will close this topic, and we will not come back to it anymore. Okay? Yeah, any other questions? Okay, so let us go on. Now, when we will speak about modest authorship, and we need to discuss.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yes, let me just find out. Are there Adventist theologians who also told this line?
No, of course not.
Okay.
Adventist theologians do not participate even in those debates. But we need to understand their methods, and we need to understand what do they do with the Bible, so that we can say something against it. I need to say that actually it was a very big movement, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, and it is not related very much to Adventists, but among the evangelicals in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 20th century especially, when the theory of evolution became very popular, and all other theories about the origin of the Bible and so on and so forth, the fundamentalist movements started. So this was the movement that tried to defend the conservative position about the origin of the Pentateuch. And this movement became very, very popular, and it affected many churches, many denominations, because it was not just a movement in one church, it was a movement that was spread among many different churches. And do you see, there are always some extremes in those movements. For example, liberal theologians, they say that the Bible is not inspired and we cannot believe the facts that are written in the Bible. It is not a historical book, and so on and so forth. But the fundamentalists, they took an opposite position, extremely opposite position. And they just said that every word is inspired, and we need to interpret Bible as literally as possible. And of course, it has some other negative issues. For example, some of the stories that should be interpreted symbolically, they anyway interpret literally. And it gave way to such doctrines, like, for example, in the eschatology, such doctrines like dispensationalism, when they began to treat every passage of the Bible in the Old Testament literally. And for example, if there is a prophecy about Israel, they believe that it should be fulfilled regarding to Israel and not regarding to the church. But I don't want to go to this direction right now, because it's a different topic, and maybe one day on one of the classes we will speak about this. Okay. So Moses' authorship. And when we speak about Moses' authorship, now our task today and our topic today is to see that there are enough evidence that can speak for Moses' authorship of the Pentateuch. And usually when we speak about authorship of any books, of any book of the Bible, we discuss two types of evidence: the internal evidences and external. So what does it mean, internal evidences? So these are the evidences from the book itself that speak for the authorship of the Moses' authorship of the Pentateuch. And that is why we need to discuss some of the passages that tell us that Moses was the author. For example, Exodus 17:14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." So do you see, this text says that actually Moses was a writer of the Pentateuch, and Moses wrote something in the book. So Moses is the author. And this is not the only passage, but there are many passages like this. For example, and Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar in the foot of the mountain and 20 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, this verse says that Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. So Moses was the one who kept records about what was going on. Or Exodus 34, verse 27. And the Lord said to Moses, "Write these words, for in accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." Again, we can see that Moses is the author. Or Deuteronomy 31:24. When Moses had finished writing the words of this law in a book to the very end. So we can see that there are many evidences in the Pentateuch that told us that Moses was the author of the Pentateuch. But these are internal evidences. Let us go to external evidences. When we speak about the external evidences, these are what others speak about the authorship of the Pentateuch. So sources that are not related to the Pentateuch. Usually, when we speak about the New Testament books, the external evidences are the quotations from church fathers or from some other people who are very close to this period and who could witness for the authorship of this or that book. But when we speak about the Pentateuch, we cannot find any other literature outside the Bible that could say about the authorship of the Pentateuch. By the way, you need to remember that the Hebrew Bible is the only document in Hebrew language that is left until now, and we don't have any other document, quite a long document in the Hebrew language from that time. So that is why this is the only source of the Hebrew language, of the ancient Hebrew language that we have. So that is why we cannot take as evidences from any other sources except from the Bible. But in the Bible, we can see that all the subsequent books or all the subsequent sources say that Moses was the author. For example, in the book of Joshua, only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. So do you see this text says that Moses commanded the law, and Moses was the one who put it down. Or Joshua 8:30-32, at that time Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, and so on and so forth. And there, in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. So we can see that it is repeated many, many times that Moses was the author or the one who wrote the book of the law. 1 Kings chapter 2, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses. And we can also find a lot of evidences in the New Testament. For example, when New Testament authors quote the Pentateuch and they say that it is written by Moses. For example, Romans 10, verse 5, it quotes Leviticus 18, and it says about the authorship of Moses. And many, many other passages that we can find in the New Testament that say about the authorship of Moses. And what is also interesting that we can find that, for example, in the New Testament, passages that quote from many books of the Pentateuch, from each book of the Pentateuch, and every time it is supported that Moses wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and the rest. But now I would like us to go to another important issue, and this is the issue of the problematic texts. So what does it mean, problematic text? The text that cannot be written by Moses. Do you understand?
Yes.
So there are some texts in the Pentateuch, and it is clear that they couldn't be written by Moses. For example, the first text, it is actually a very, very simple one. The story about the death of Moses. Evidently, Moses was not able to write a story about his death. Of course, even in Talmud, we can find like two versions how rabbis try to explain this passage. Okay, let us read. This point is subject to a Tanaitic dispute, as it is taught in another Baraita. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there. Is it possible that after Moses died, he himself wrote, and Moses died there? Rather, Moses wrote the entire Torah until this point, and Joshua wrote from this point forward. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so just a little bit more about this passage. So this passage is from Talmud, and the tractate is called Baba Batra. So this Baba Batra 14 and 15 is very, very famous passage, and most probably you will go to this passage very often, because in this passage rabbis just argue with each other, or they try to explain the origin of the books of the Bible. And in this passage we can find that rabbis actually spoke about the authorship of every book of the Old Testament. Okay, Pastor Ephraim, I can see that you raised your hand. You have a question?
Yes, sir. It got me thinking. I want to know evidences that support Moses' authorship of the Pentateuch.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that the Jewish acceptance of the authorship of Moses cannot be used as an argument for Moses' authorship?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, it is one of the arguments, and this could be one of the arguments, and this is arguments comes back to the tradition, that it is a very, very long tradition that comes through centuries, and this tradition, as we saw right now, has never been challenged. It was challenged, as I said in the very beginning, maybe only in some writings, like, for example, the second book of Ezra. We can find that they said that the book of Moses was lost, and Ezra himself wrote because he was inspired by God. But anyway, the tradition about Moses' authorship has never been challenged, and it could be one of the arguments for the authorship of Moses. It's true. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your comment. Mm-hmm. Yes, Pastor Ephraim, can you please mute yourself? Oh, thank you. Yeah, because there is some noise. Okay, Pastor Gift Chesawa.
Yes, Prof. Looking at the internal evidences, there's a text, for example, like Genesis 26, verse 5. Of course, it's not there, where it states that Abraham kept my charge, my statutes, and my commandments.
Yeah.
Could it be possible that Moses could have used some of the documents passed on from the patriarchal age based on that text, or the information was passed on already?
Oh, yeah. Do you see? Thank you for mentioning this text. This is a very, very important text. And this text we usually use as an evidence that actually the law that was written in the later on in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, actually those laws had existed even before Moses wrote them. And actually we can find a lot of proofs for it. For example, the law about the sacrifices. We can see that the patriarchs brought the sacrifices that has been described later on that were described later on in the book of Leviticus, or Levirate marriage. So in the Genesis 38, the story about Tamar, we can see that the Levirate marriage was already effective, but it was described later on in the book of Deuteronomy. And many, many other issues like this, you can find them already in existence in the time of Abraham, although later on they were written by Moses. So all this speaks in favor of the idea that the laws, that Abraham knew the laws that were codified later on, but those laws were transferred orally from generation to generation. And also some of the laws or traditions were common not only for the Jewish or Hebrew or Israelite society, but they were common for the ancient Near East. But we will speak about this a little bit later. Did I answer the question?
Yes, Prof. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I can see one more hand, Pastor Angel Chipulu. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof. I want to ride on the internal evidence of the authorship of the Pentateuch. With all this overwhelming evidence, why is it that some, like those proponents of those theories, theories like the documentary theory, elementary and supplementary, why did they have a problem to accept that it's Moses who wrote when there are so much unprecedented evidence as revealed in the books themselves?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Do you see? So we need to understand at the time when those theories appeared. For a long period of time, as I said, nobody questioned the authorship of Moses for a very, very long period of time. It started quite late in the 18th century. In the 19th century, it reached climax in the 19th century. So what happened at that time? So we need to understand that it was a time of rationalism and time when people do not believe very much in miracles, in something supernatural, but they try to explain everything. They try to explain everything through some natural explanations. For example, I just will tell you the one example. There was another very famous German scholar, Hermann Hünkel, and he was the author, or he originated such a method of studying the Bible as form criticism. It's a liberal way of studying the Bible. But what was his main idea? Sometimes I make a joke and say that he probably loved very much German folk tales. Do you know this famous Brothers Grimm? Have you heard about them, Brothers Grimm? They wrote tales, children tales by Brothers Grimm. So, like for example, very famous children's stories like Red Hood, how is it called? Okay, we are Adventists, we do not read the tales. So the main idea is like this. So what Brothers Grimm did, they just were folklorists. So what they did, they traveled throughout Germany and they collected the children tales that people told to their children. And after that, they put everything together and they published the tales. And it was folk tales, what people were telling at evening time to their children before they go to bed, for example. And when Hünkel at that time looked at the folklore, he made an assumption that maybe Bible is also a folklore. So do you see? So they understood the Bible just as a piece of human production. So human made all those stories in the same way as German people made up those tales that the Brothers Grimm just collected. And all those ideas became very, very popular, especially in 19th century. And they did this not only to the Bible. For example, the famous Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, they also did the same with those pieces of literature. So they didn't believe that it was produced by one person, but they tried to find different sources in Iliad and Odyssey. So do you see, it was like a common trend at that time, that they didn't believe in, they didn't take for granted what was presented to them through tradition, but they want to challenge almost everything. And the Bible was also one of the pieces that they want to challenge. They want to see, was it really written by Moses or by the authors that are people claim it was written by. And very soon they began to doubt in the tradition, and they rejected tradition. And do you see, it happened not only in theology, as I said, it happened in all many other areas of science, of knowledge. Like they didn't accept, even in science, the tradition that existed for many years. And in some cases, they were right. And that is why they wanted to challenge almost everything. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Prof. It's noted, well elaborate.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, let us continue. So how did rabbis explain it? It was very simple. In this tractate, Baba Batra, as I said, they just assumed that Moses wrote everything up to the account of his death, and the story about his death was written by Joshua. And this is a very acceptable idea. For example, when we look at the end of the book of Joshua, we also can see that this book ends with the death of Joshua. Joshua died. And after that, there is a story about Eliezer, and Eliezer also died. And the tradition says that most probably Joshua wrote his book up to the moment of his death, and how he died and how he was buried was continued by Eliezer. And Eliezer died, and this verse was added by his son Phinehas. Phinehas or Pinchas? Okay, Phinehas. So we can see that this is a kind of tradition that existed at that time, and it's not a really problematic text. We can say that really Joshua could finish the book. So another text that is also could be problematic. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth. And some scholars say it is impossible for a person who is meek to speak such a thing about himself. Okay, so how can we explain this? And what we can say about such verse and similar verses is that maybe there were some small insertions that could be made by Joshua, because Joshua was the one who copied the book of the law. So most probably he made a copy of the Pentateuch, and he could add, by God's inspiration, some of comments like this. Okay. And now we come to the more problematic text, which causes more problems. This is Genesis 36 verse 31. These are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. Okay, so what does this text say? Okay, how can we explain this one? And what does it mean? So what does it mean that this text says, these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites? So this text assumed that there are already kings in Israel. Yes or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Okay, you understand that. So this text assumes that the kings already existed in Israel when this text was written.
Sorry.
Okay, so it was somebody joined us. We cannot explain it otherwise, but we can just say, so there is only one explanation that we can suggest for this text and for some other similar text. We understand that the Pentateuch, we do not have the first copy of the Pentateuch written by Moses. We have the copies that were transmitted through generations. And we can explain this verse as really as a command written by one of the people who copied the text. So most probably it was really inserted by somebody who copied the text of the Pentateuch, the text of the book of Genesis, by some of the scholars or some of the scribes who lived in the time of monarchy in Israel. And he just added this comment. But I want to tell you immediately that actually such kind of insertions, there are very few of them. And even if there are some insertions, they also could be made under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit by some of the following copyists. Okay? And the same, when Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So what is the problem in this text?
The problem, Prof, is the mention of Dan.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Because Dan didn't exist at that time.
Yes.
At that time, the name of this city was different. It was Luz, if I'm not mistaken. And it was remained when the tribe of Dan migrated to the north and they conquered this place for themselves. So, of course, it cannot be written in the time of Moses, because even Moses didn't know at that time that this place was called Dan. So when Moses wrote, most probably he wrote the original name of this place. So how can we explain this? So in the same way as we explained the previous one. So most probably it was corrected or it was changed by one of the copyists, and we can find several examples of this. For example, in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, we can see that Abraham pitched his tent at Bethel, or between Bethel and Hai, and A, between Bethel and A. So, but Bethel didn't exist in the time of Abraham. In the time of Abraham, this city had a different name. But obviously, the author of the Pentateuch, Moses, changed its name to Bethel because Bethel was well known to the Israelites at his time. But the previous name completely was forgotten. So if he mentioned the previous name, nobody would know what this place was. So that is why they used the modern name of the place. And it can be done by one of the copies who just wanted to make this text understandable for the readers who didn't remember the previous name of this place. Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions, I would like to answer them. I see your hand, Pastor Fulu.
Yes,
sorry. Yes, and just before you go, I want to read another question that was published in chat. Hello, Prof. From the explanation given about scholars who would but want to challenge everything in existence, would I be wrong to state that some scholars are not believers? Yes, you are right. So especially in the 19th century, when, as I said, rationalism was very, very popular, people didn't believe in miracles. So they believed that everything can be explained by some natural reasons, or some natural explanations could be found for everything. So that is why people in the 19th century, especially after the French Revolution, when atheism became more and more popular, they didn't believe in God. And most of those scholars had this atheistic worldview. That is why they try to explain everything from their point of view. Okay, Pastor Fulufhela.
Yes.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
Prof. Thank you. Good morning. I want to just take you back a little bit to the internal, what is this? The internal
Evidence.
Evidence, yes. Unfortunately, by the way, as I mentioned to you, I was in transit as you were presenting that, but I did hear some of these verses. So here, my problem here is that, and maybe you will explain maybe if how the Hebrew actually comes through, or whatever language that the text was originally written in. If we are arguing that Moses is the author, and in English, I mean, just simple English, and the text is reading, and Moses wrote down. I mean, don't you think that if I was Moses, then I will probably put it down like I would probably put it down like, and I wrote down all the words, as opposed to saying, and Moses. And also, so this applies also to the other texts. And I just, when I'm thinking about it, I'm just wondering, could it be coming out like this because of the translations, from the original languages to English and, our current languages. But I am finding it to be somewhat a weak point to the internal evidence, when you read the text, and we are saying this is Moses who was writing, yet he's saying, and Moses. And then it also takes me to the problematic text that we've just dealt with now, where, and maybe before I get to that one, I just want to understand these internal evidences. Is it the position of the Adventist theology, or is it also like a general acceptable evidence, even amongst other theologians? So that's another question. And then lastly, on the problematic texts, I just also feel like, we are trying very hard to justify, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't believe. So we're trying very hard to justify that Moses definitely was the author. And then whereas when it comes to the problematic text, then we are forced to assume, we are forced to concede that no, maybe there was a copyist, someone who copied and then added, like in the case of, Numbers, where you were saying that it could most probably be Joshua who added that text. So I'm just, trying to battle with that in my head to say, you know, and I wanted you just to maybe share your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Actually, as I see, you asked several questions in one, and I try to answer them. Okay, first of all, about the third person. So everything is written in the third person. And it was a tradition in the Bible that all the books, almost all the books, with some exceptions, were written from the third person perspective. So take any book of the Bible except the book of Ezekiel, and you will see that all the books are written from the third person perspectives, even the book of the prophets. So probably the book of the prophets is the very, very good example. So how it is started? These are the words of Joel, or these are the words that was told to Jeremiah by God. Like, for example, yes. So in case of Jeremiah, this is, of course, in our days, the authorship of the book of Jeremiah is questioned many, many times. But even earlier, when we look at the 19th century, actually people believe that the book of Jeremiah was written by Jeremiah, but it was written from the third person, So he wrote about himself in the third person. And we can say that it was a common tradition to write the book like this. So the authors didn't put themselves forward, but they like always were hidden behind. The same is true about the book of Joshua. It was written by Joshua, but Joshua is always mentioned in the book in the third person and never mentioned like I did this or I did that. The only book that is really exception from this is the book of Ezekiel, because Ezekiel is written from the first person perspective. He wrote about himself, I, not in the third person. But every other books are written from the third person perspective in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we can see, but also authors usually never disclose themselves. Even do you remember in the book of Matthew, there is a passage that speaks about how Matthew was called to the ministry. And Matthew also never says that it was me. He just speaks about himself in the third person. The same is true about the book of John. Even people sometimes question, was John really the author of the book of John or the Gospel of John? Because he never speaks about himself in the first person. He is always in the third person. So we can say that it was just a way or style of ancient people when they wrote the books. And but I like your approach because you demonstrated the critical thinking, and it's very, very important for studying in the postgraduate school. So can you mention me again? It looks like you asked several more questions, but I can skip something.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. You've explained that question well, Prof. The other one, I was just trying to understand with the internal evidences, if it is just the Adventist theology or is it?
No, it is not just Adventist theology. You can find, for example, one book which is very, very popular until now, Introduction to the Old Testament, written by Harrison. This book was written, it's quite a thick book. It was written in 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. But can you imagine, after 70 years, it is still probably one of the best introductions to the Old Testament. written from the conservative perspective. And I have this book in my office, and this book was recently republished. And the fact that it was published again says about its popularity. Of course, some of the material is already obsolete, because 70 years is already 70 years. But anyway, many ideas that are mentioned in this book are still valid and they can be applied. So some of those arguments you can find there. And as I said, it is not only our Adventist approach, it is just a general evangelical, I would say, approach to this problem. Okay, anything else from you? Okay, I see 3 more hands, and one question is on the chart. Let me start from the question on the chart. Are these instances of where some Adventist scholars have also identified some of these problematic texts and have propounded theories, thereby casting doubt on our fundamental belief regarding the inspiration of the Bible? As far as I know, we as Adventists are very conservative, and we usually do not question all those issues. But of course, maybe there are some who is more liberal. They can question all of this. But as far as I know, actually, it is not the main question that can be disturbed or can be asked by the Adventists. As far as I know, it is not the case. Okay, so now, Pastor Ephraim, can you go ahead and ask your question?
All right. Thank you, Professor. I just want to know more so that I will be able to situate my thoughts. You see, from the explanation you gave on the problematic texts, that some of them were probably products of copyists who insert some of these sentences and points. Now, sir, do you mean that the Bible we hold in our hands today is not the original version that Moses wrote? It is polished. It has some insertions there. And I remember when we were looking at the documentary hypothesis, where we refuted them on the grounds of we cannot lay hands on those materials they purported to be the sources. But sir, can you tell us, perhaps scholarship was able to discover the original version written by Moses and compared with the current version to see the discrepancies?
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, actually, do you see, we are already, we started very important questions, theological questions. And these are the questions about the origin of the Bible. How can we trust the Bible? And it's good that you ask those questions, because I believe this is exactly the place where we can discuss it openly. So first of all, let me start with a little bit with textology. So textology is a science or the direction that studies the text of the Bible. Of the Old Testament, there is Old Testament textology and New Testament textology. They're of course different, and they face different challenges and different problems. And so when we speak about the textology of the Old Testament, of course, we need to understand, and this is actually the material of the introduction of the Old Testament, and I usually speak more about those issues during the course of introduction. So what do you know about the text? You know that the most ancient text, the full text of the Old Testament, is the so-called Codex Leningradensis, or Leningrad Codex, as it is called. It is called like this because the copy of this codex is kept in Leningrad, or now it is St. Petersburg in Russia. And this is the codex, or this is the text of the Hebrew Bible from which all our Bibles are translated. What I mean, if I don't have it here at my hand, there is Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. This is the text of the Old Testament, and the main text is taken from the Leningrad Codex. This Leningrad Codex is dated to the 10th or 11th century AD. So do you see, it is just like about 1000 years old. And of course, we have some fragments of the text that is older, but the full text of the Hebrew Bible is dated just about by 10th century AD. And it is clear why, because at that time, in the ancient times, text was written on the parchment, and parchment is made from the skins of animals, and parchment cannot be preserved for a long time. So that is why we do not have the full text of the Hebrew Bible earlier than this. We didn't have until the discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls allowed us to compare the text that existed during the time of Jesus with the text that was transmitted to us through the generations. And you know very well that in many cases, the text preserved through generations is exactly the same with the text that was found at Dead Sea caves. So it proves that the Bible that was used by Jesus was the same Bible that we are using today. So the text was not damaged, the text of the Bible. And we have, of course, we have some other textual traditions, and those traditions can testify about some differences in the text. One of such tradition is called Samaritan Pentateuch. Samaritan Pentateuch. And if you are very much interested, I can give you the English translation of the Samaritan Pentateuch, and you can read it. And you can compare the Samaritan Pentateuch text with the Pentateuch that we have in our hands. This Samaritan Pentateuch is also very old, but of course we do not have the original manuscript of the Samaritan Pentateuch. And because of the schism that happened after the exile, do you remember that the Samaritans wanted to participate in the building of the temple, but the Jews didn't allow them to do this. And after that, the Samaritans made their own religious group, and they even invited one of the priests to be the high priest. And most probably this priest who came to Samaria, he took with himself the copy of the Pentateuch. So they preserved Pentateuch as a sacred book. And they actually recognized only the Pentateuch as a sacred book, and they didn't recognize any other books of the Hebrew Bible as sacred. And if you compare the text of the Samaritan Pentateuch and the text of our Pentateuch, we can see some differences between them. And do you remember the story about Jesus who met Samaritan woman? And Samaritan woman asked a question about the place where people should worship. So do you see in this Samaritan Pentateuch, they emphasized some other issues, like, for example, they emphasized places from Samaria that were close to Samaria and worship there compared to the Pentateuch. And there is a question, and this is a question of textology. When they compare text, they can see which variant is original and which is not. Also, we can see Yes, but when we speak about the Samaritan Pentateuch, we can see that many of those changes in the Samaritan Pentateuch had an ideological background. So it means that people from Samaria wanted to change something to emphasize that, to say that they are right in their worship and they are in a better position than the people in Judea. Also, we can see that there is a Septuagint. Of course, Septuagint is the translation from Hebrew to Greek. In Septuagint, we have older versions of the Septuagint, like, for example, some of the codexes are dated to the 3rd or 4th century AD. So it's very close to the time of Jesus. Furthermore, Septuagint was the Bible that the Christian used. And when we compare Septuagint in the Hebrew Bible, we can see that in many cases, the text is the same. So we can say that the same text is taken for translation. But in some cases, there are some differences. And these are the tasks of the textology to define which text is original. But what I want to tell you right now, I just want to tell you that we have enough evidence to say that God preserved his Bible until now. And of course, there are some variants in the manuscripts, but you will see that those variants are just minor. They are not, there is no big differences between the manuscripts or differences in some crucial questions. But some minor variants really exist if you compare all the manuscripts. And this is, as for me, is a good evidence that actually the text of the Bible was preserved through the generations without major damages. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I am satisfied.
Okay. Okay, Pastor Christopher.
I think my question is has been touched, but my question again would be, it would be easy for us to understand internal evidence about the authorship of Moses if we delve and only operate within the Pentateuch. But I would want to find out these problematic texts. Is it the problem of the copyists, or what? How can we help ourselves understand the existence? Why are they found there?
Okay, so can you say again what exactly is your question? What is exactly your question?
My question is the problematic texts. Are they there because of the typists, or the time the Old Testament, especially the Pentateuch, was being written?
Okay, so do you see there are different problematic texts. So, and they can deal with different issues. Like, for example, this one speaks about the meekness of Moses, and the person who is meek actually cannot say this about himself. And as I said, one of the possible explanation, that this text could be added by Joshua, who was the one who copied the book of the law, and he can just, because he was an eyewitness, and we can say that he was also inspired by God to make this statement about Moses. What we say when we speak about other texts, but of course they deal with the different issues. But look, I just mentioned how many these problematic texts. Only 2 problematic texts in the Pentateuch. Only 2. In all other issues, we do not have any other facts or any other hints that it was not written by Moses. So, and we can explain it just as the copyist who copied the text. And of course, the text was copied, and it was copied not once, it was copied many, many times. And maybe some of these copyists, who most probably were also inspired by God, made those just few comments. And those comments do not damage the content, the message of the text, but just something additional that just give us additional information. But as I said, they do not damage the text itself. So we can be sure that the text of the Pentateuch was transmitted correctly through all those generations and ages. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Pastor Loti Bande.
Prof, thank you so much. I have two questions. One is a loose one. You have acknowledged that Numbers 12, verse 3, concerning the meekness of Moses, and probably Deuteronomy 34 were written or inserted by Joshua. You acknowledge that he was actually under inspiration. This is one of the arguments that some liberals bring, that based on some of these insertions, this could be an argument that it's not only Moses who authored the Pentateuch. In your acknowledgement, would we say also loosely that we are also acknowledging that the very fact that we accept Joshua as one of the authors, that then the Pentateuch was not just written by Moses? That's one question. The second one has to do with the form, the literary structure of the Pentateuch. What is called the literary collage is what we seem to find in the Pentateuch, where you look at there's poetry, the narratives are written in a certain way. And one of the arguments is that Moses, being one author, cannot be the only one looking at the literary structure of the different books that are found in the Pentateuch. What's your take on this one?
Okay, so the first question was about, can we say that some other people except Moses were co-authors of the Pentateuch? Do you see, even Joshua himself says that in the book of Joshua, we can see that he says about the Pentateuch as the book of Moses. Even though some of the texts were added could be added by Joshua, but he is not credited as the author of the Pentateuch. And why? Because maybe it was just a tradition or co-author of the Pentateuch. Maybe it is just a tradition on the one hand, but on the other hand, we can see that Moses anyway is one principal author, the one who put down everything, the story from Genesis till Deuteronomy. And actually, we can see that the same we can find in the book of Jeremiah. In the book of Jeremiah, there is a text when it says, until this point, the words of Jeremiah. And after that, we have, it seems to me, 2 more chapters in the book of Jeremiah. But do you see the entire book of Jeremiah is under the title Jeremiah, even though some material is added by somebody else to the book of Jeremiah. So this is just a tradition, and this is how I can answer this question. And your second question, just remind me, is about
the literary structure of
literary structure. Yes, correct. This is a very, very good question, and it will be a topic of our next lecture, when we can see that the entire Pentateuch has some unity in structure, when we can see that the author uses the same pattern, and it speaks about single authorship of the book. It speaks for the single authorship of the book. And of course, in the Pentateuch, we can see a different kind of material like poetry, prose, a legal material, and some people say that it is impossible for one person to be so diverse and to use different styles. But yes, in fact, it is not true. even our modern authors, they can write prose and they can write poetry, and it's not actually a big problem. Okay, so but our next lecture will speak about this. We will touch the question about the unity of the Pentateuch, and we will see that it actually proves single authorship of the book. Okay, anything else? So if we don't have questions, I would suggest let us have a break. So now is 9:37. So let us have a 13 minutes break, and we will come back in 13 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
So we are continuing with another presentation, and this is just general introduction to the Pentateuch. And during this presentation, during this lecture, we will pay attention to the structure of the Pentateuch, overall structure, and we will see also some other elements that can help us to understand the unity and appreciate the unity of the Pentateuch. Okay, so let us go on, and we can see that first of all, what speaks about the unity of the Pentateuch is the fact that the authors of the Old Testament always refer to the Pentateuch as one book. So we can almost never see, not almost, we can never see a reference to some particular books of the Pentateuch, like, for example, a reference to Genesis, to Exodus, to Deuteronomy. But always when they refer to the Pentateuch, they refer to it as one book. And we can see many evidence about that. So Pentateuch is one book. And of course, it speaks about the unity. So the people of the ancient times didn't consider it as 5 different books, but as one book. And the same is true about the authors of the New Testament. They also believed that the Pentateuch is one book. Like Jesus also refers to Pentateuch as a book of Moses. So there is, of course, a question about the term Pentateuch, because Pentateuch from Greek is penta is 5. So it's like five books of something 5. And this term Pentateuch was known since the time of, well, there is a mistake here, since the time of Josephus. And Josephus lived in the 1st century, and also Philo. Philo also lived mostly in the 1st century. So we understand that already in the 1st century AD, people knew Pentateuch as 5 books. And most probably this term Pentateuch came into existence because when the Bible was translated from Hebrew to Greek, most probably it was divided into 5 sections, into 5 books. And it was done because, one scroll, and in ancient times, you remember people wrote on parchment, and one scroll couldn't have all 5 books of the Pentateuch. So that is why, for the convenience, they divided the Pentateuch on 5 parts, on 5 books, so that they can be kept on 5 different scrolls. And that is why the term Pentateuch appeared. Okay, so now when we speak about the Pentateuch, we need to acknowledge that there is one common theme and one common plot that unites the entire book. And what is interesting also, that each book is connected to each other. Each book continues the plot of the previous book. And let us see several examples. Like, for example, Exodus 1 to 18. And we can see that these are events that happened when people from Egypt came to Sinai. And after that, we can see from Exodus to Numbers, everything that is described until Numbers 10:10 are the events that took place at Sinai. And Numbers 10:11 until Deuteronomy, this is the road from Sinai to Moab. So we can see it's even very difficult to make this division between the books, because they are connected to each other. And sometimes we can even say that the division is not is done maybe just arbitrary, because the narrative continues. And the idea of the narrative comes from one book to another as something as the same. So we cannot divide them. And most probably the division was arbitrary. And the good example is the division between the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus. So if you remember, the book of Exodus ends when the glory of God came down on the tabernacle, and the book of Leviticus starts when God is speaking from the tabernacle. And we can see that it is like one narrative, so it is not interrupted here. The glory of God came down and God is speaking from the tabernacle. So that is why sometimes we can see that the division between the books is not something that was intended from the very beginning. Or the same is true about the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis ends when Joseph dies in Egypt. And we can see that the book of Exodus starts with the list of the people who came to Egypt. So this is also very much related to each other. So that is why from the ancient times, we can see that the book of Pentateuch, the Pentateuch, was considered as one book, not as many different books. Also, what is another element that unites the Pentateuch and make it as one book is the person of Moses. So the personality of Moses unites all the narrative together, because Moses is represented as the second Adam, the second Noah, and Moses also has some connections to Abraham. So in this case, we can say that Moses is the figure that unites all the narrative of the Pentateuch together. Okay, and as I said, at the end and the beginning of the book is very closely related. So sometimes it's very difficult even to make a border between these two books. As I said already about Exodus and Leviticus, it's very difficult to say that here exactly we can make a border and we can make so we can divide the book here. Or for example, Leviticus and Numbers, the same. So we can see that actually the same idea, people are still at Mount Sinai, and everything what is going on is going around Mount Sinai. And the same is true about Numbers and Deuteronomy. So the book of Numbers ends when the people came to the plain of Moab, and Deuteronomy starts when people are at the plain of Moab. So there is a unity in the book. Another interesting feature, by the way, I took it from the book of Selhammer, Pentateuch as Narrative, and Selhammer points out that we can see one pattern that is repeated throughout Genesis, Exodus, and even up to Deuteronomy. And this is the pattern how the author interchanges some sections of the book. Like, for example, usually in the beginning we have narrative, and narrative ends with a piece of poetry. And after that we have an epilogue. And look at this table. So do you see the story of creation in Genesis 1-2 ends up with the Song of Adam, and this is the first poetry that we can find in the Bible. And after that we have an epilogue, Genesis 2:24. So this is the first section of the Pentateuch. The next section, chapter 3, we can see in this section again narrative about how fall took place. After that we have a poetry, and these are different promises to man and to woman. And after that we have an epilogue. Chapter 4 follows the same pattern. We have Cain's descendants, Genesis 4. After that a song, poetry again, a Lamech song. And after that again we have an epilogue. And Joseph's story, chapters 37 up to 48. Again, it ends with the Jacob's blessing. Jacob's blessing are written in the form of poetry. And after that, chapter 50 is an epilogue. Exodus from Egypt, story which is written in the book of Exodus, chapter 1-14. After that, we have Song of Moses, Exodus 15. This is a poetry. And after that, again, an epilogue. From Sinai to Moab, we have the narrative. And again, we have a poetry, Balaam's blessing, in Numbers 23 and 24. And also in the end, we have a Moses blessing, Deuteronomy 32-33. And finally, we have an epilogue. And so if we see the same pattern that is used throughout the Pentateuch, we can really say that it speaks for one single authorship. So the same author was had in mind this pattern, and he implemented it in the Pentateuch. Okay, so now let us speak about the structure of the Pentateuch. And I just give you the common structure that you can find almost in every book that speaks about the Pentateuch or the commentary on the Pentateuch. And usually people divide the entire Pentateuch into several sections. And this division is done according to the content of each section. So, for example, the first 11 chapters, they are called, it is traditionally called primeval history. And after that, the rest of the book of Genesis is the stories of the patriarchs. Exodus 1-18, this is the Exodus from Egypt. After that, we have a big section from Exodus 19 until Numbers 10:10. And this is the section about how people of Israel stayed at Sinai. And the end of the book of Numbers, this is the journey from Sinai to Moab. And the book of Deuteronomy is a unique book because it is written as a repetition of the law to a new generation. So this is just a structure of the Pentateuch that is shared by many scholars. And actually, there is no debates here because it's quite clear. And all the divisions are done according to the content of each section. And now just pay attention to this because this is a very important issue. The theme of the Pentateuch. What is the main theme of the Pentateuch? And I just want to refer you to the book of David Kleins, The Theme of the Pentateuch. It seems to me it was his dissertation, but I could be mistaken. So this book is available through eBook Central. You can easily find it and you can read it for yourself. So what is his main idea? He was trying to find one theme that could unite the entire Pentateuch together. So one theme that is coming from Genesis up to Deuteronomy, and it can be applied to any part of the Pentateuch. And finally, he came to this conclusion. And just pay attention to this because it, of course, you can encounter some of the questions about this in the quiz. Well, the theme of the Pentateuch is the partial fulfillment, which implies also the partial non-fulfillment of the promise to or blessing of the patriarchs. The promise of blessing is both the divine initiative in a world where human initiatives always lead to disaster and are an affirmation of the primal divine intentions for humanity. The promise has three elements: posterity, divine-human relationship, and land. The posterity element of the promise is dominant in Genesis 12:50, the relationship element in Exodus and Leviticus, and the land element in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Okay, I just want to emphasize, because it's really very, very important for us to understand, that the main theme of the Pentateuch is partial fulfillment and partial non-fulfillment of the promises given to the patriarchs. So why he speaks like this? Because really the promise that he is speaking about has these three elements: the posterity or descendants, divine-human relationship, and land. And when you look at the first blessing, the blessing of Adam and Eve in the first chapter of the book of Genesis, we can see that God blessed Adam and Eve, and he said that be fruitful and multiply. So what is this about? This is about the descendants, about the posterity, and possess the land. This is about the land. And of course, it implies a divine-human relationship. So we can see that these elements are later on repeated to all subsequent patriarchs. So for example, when Noah came out of the ark, God again blessed him, and he repeated the same promise. So be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the land, or fill the land, and be a master over the land. And of course, it also implied a divine-human relationship. And when we look later on, we can see that the same idea is repeated again and again for Abraham as well, because for him, the promise that God gave him was again about the descendants. You will be a father of great nation, and you will possess the land, or your descendants will possess a land. And of course, the divine-human relationship are also involved here. So do you see this is like the main theme that comes through entire Pentateuch, throughout entire Pentateuch. And later in the book of Exodus, we can see that the first element, the posterity or the descendants, is already fulfilled, because in the beginning of the book of Exodus, we can see that Israel is presented as a strong nation with many people in the beginning of the book of Exodus. Divine-human relationship is also a matter of the covenant, and this covenant is also one of the main topics which comes throughout all the Pentateuch, starting with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Exodus, Sinai, and later on Deuteronomy. So it was also fulfilled. But one part of this promise has never been fulfilled in the Pentateuch, and this is the promise of land. So we can see in the end of the Pentateuch, it's true, people of Israel are a numerous nation. People of Israel are in the relationship with God, they're in a covenant with God, but they still do not possess the land. So this part of the promise is not fulfilled in the Pentateuch. That is why David Klein says that this is a partial fulfillment and partial non-fulfillment of the promises of blessing given to the patriarchs. And finally, the possession of the land is the topic of the book of Joshua, when we can see in the book of Joshua, they conquered the land, and the land is now belongs to them, and all the promises are fulfilled. And it's interesting that in the book of Joshua, Joshua himself says that none of the words, okay, let me try to find this quotation in the book of Joshua. And this is chapter 21 and verse 45. None of the good promises the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. Everything was fulfilled. So we can see that Joshua, in the book of Joshua, says that all the promises that were given to the people of Israel were fulfilled. So we can see that this is a logical continuation of the Pentateuch that we can find in the book of Joshua. By the way, it just, I don't want to speak about this very much, but in the 20th century, another idea became very prominent, and one of the advocates of this idea was a German scholar Gerhard von Rath. So today we spoke about the origin of the Pentateuch, and we said about different models, how people believed the Pentateuch came into existence. And Gerhard von Rath introduced another term. He said not the Pentateuch, but Hexateuch. And he included the book of Joshua to the Pentateuch. And we can understand why. So he wanted to say that this is like one unity, not only the 5 books, but the book of Joshua should be also added to these 5 books, because it's a logical continuation of the Pentateuch. But later on, his idea was discarded because another idea became very popular, and this is the idea of the Deuteronomistic history, when another German scholar, Martin North, just cut the book of Deuteronomy from the Pentateuch and added it to the so-called Deuteronomistic history. But we will not touch this theory in our class. It is maybe some time later. Okay, so what I want to emphasize? I want to emphasize this topic about the theme of the Pentateuch. So the theme of the Pentateuch is partial fulfillment and partial non-fulfillment of the promises given to the patriarchs. And these promises has 3 parts. These are descendants, these are divine-human relationship, and the final one is the land. So please remember, because it's very important when we discuss, especially when we discuss the book of Genesis, because those elements, we will come to those elements many times. I hope it is clear. Okay, so do you have any questions? If you have any, we can try to entertain them, and after that we will come to the book of Genesis.
Yes,
yes, please.
Just a quick one. I think probably I might have missed it. Why are they saying partial fulfillment and partial non-fulfillment? Just remind me again, why partial?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So as I said, the promise about posterity, descendants, was fulfilled. The promise of the divine-human relationship was also fulfilled. But of course, it is another question how it was fulfilled. But the promise about the land was not fulfilled in the Pentateuch. So that is why he says about the partial fulfillment, because not everything that was promised in the book of Pentateuch was fulfilled in the Pentateuch. The land was promised, but they have never got the land. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Pastor Christopher, I see you raised the hand. Please go ahead.
Sorry, Prof. Just sorry.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Yeah, by the way, if you have questions, don't worry to interrupt me. I will not be offended, but it's better for me if you stop me, and if something is not clear, don't worry about that. You can interrupt me at any moment. Okay, now we are approaching to the book of Genesis. Yes, but before we go to the book of Genesis, so one of the questions that were asked in the first part of the class was about the unity. I hope that you can now appreciate the unity of the book, and we can see that really the Pentateuch is a product of one mind or of one person, not as liberal scholars say, it came from different documents or different sources. Okay, so now let's go to the book of Genesis. And I would like to start it like this. So one of the key texts in the book of Genesis. Yes.
Just before you proceed, I'm just thinking, why is it important to hold just this view that Moses is the author, unlike the liberal thought which entertains other authors? Why is it important to hold this thought?
Because it's very foundational. Do you see, if we reject authorship of Moses, many different other questions arise that we need to answer. And first of all, who is the author of the Pentateuch? And why was it written? Because do you see, what we discussed is actually just top of the iceberg. I mean, this liberal theology. Liberal theology tries to put everything upside down in studying the Bible. For example, when they date Pentateuch very late, it has tremendous consequences. So in this case, what was the original one? So what was the beginning of the Bible? And usually, liberal scholars say that the Bible started with the writing of the prophets. So the prophets were writing their books, and in their books they tried to articulate some agenda of moral behavior, how people should behave, how should relate to Yahweh, to God. And only later on, the Pentateuch was codified. It means that those ideas about moral behavior and everything came from prophets to Pentateuch. So Pentateuch was just composed as an articulation of all those ideas addressed to Israel by prophets, and they were combined together, and that is why Pentateuch appeared. So do you see, it is very, very foundational. So if we refute the authorship of Moses, so in this case, we will end up with many, many other questions. And those questions, we will not be able to answer them.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Again, Pastor Sarindra Harivola, please go ahead.
Prof, where is the place of redemption in the theme of Pentateuch?
Oh, redemption. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So it's a good question about the redemption. I believe it is in the divine human relationship. So this is exactly the place where the idea of redemption comes up. And do you see, from the very beginning, and we will speak about the covenant and the importance of the covenant in the Pentateuch. And we can find this continuity of the covenant relationship, because the redemption is the part of the covenant. And when God made a covenant, especially, it will be clearly seen when God made a covenant with Abraham. So we will see the elements of redemption there. And yeah, we will speak about it when we will speak about Abraham mostly. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we can continue.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the key text of Genesis, of the book of Genesis, I believe this is the
Sorry, Prof.
15. Yes, yes, please.
I was typing a question, but so let me
Okay.
just. I was asking in terms of the issue about the posterity.
Mhm.
Since at the end of the Pentateuch, they had not actually gotten to the promised land. They have not reached the land flowing with milk and honey. How then do we say that the element of prosperity was fulfilled within the first 5 books, within the Pentateuch?
You mean prosperity or posterity?
Prosperity.
You mean descendants or well-being?
No, you see, you have 3 elements here: posterity,
yes,
divine human relationship, and land.
Yes.
I just want explanation as in with regards to how posterity was fulfilled within the Pentateuch.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was not fulfilled in the. I mean, in the end of Pentateuch or in the end of Genesis.
No, that is throughout the Pentateuch. Was it fulfilled or it was partially fulfilled?
Yes. So posterity, it is mostly about the descendants, and it was fulfilled because Israel is a big nation. So God promised Abraham that he will make a big nation from him. His descendants will be a great nation. So we can see that this part of the divine promise was fulfilled, but others not completely. Not completely. Did I answer a question?
Yeah, that's the. So I guess then we are looking at posterity in terms of the expansion from Abraham to the 12 tribes and then to their various descendants. That then forms then the posterity.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, if it is in that context, yes, but because I was wondering, they are still going to the promised land where they will still have to cover the whole land because they were not, I don't think they had even read the numbers that could take over the whole land that was promised them. And well, like you said, if it has to do with the partial fulfillment of it, then maybe, but I was doubting whether it was completely fulfilled at the end of the book of Genesis chapter 15.
Yeah, one more thing that we will discuss, and you will see it, and it's very, very interesting to think that in the book of Numbers and in the book of Deuteronomy, and especially in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses speaks about the promised land as if it was already conquered. So he speaks about it in terms as if it is just a matter of time. So it's not a problem to conquer the land. And this is one of the interesting detail in the book of Deuteronomy, and we will touch it, we will speak about it when we come to study this book. Okay, so we can continue. So the key text of the book of Genesis is a very famous text, Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offsprings and her offsprings. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So what is important in this text? Why I say that this is the key text, because the rest of the narrative of the book of Genesis can be exactly presented as the continuity of this text. Even in the very next chapter, chapter 4 of the book of Genesis, we can see that in this chapter, Cain killed Abel. And this is again enmity. And later on, we understand that Cain was a kind of an offspring of the serpent, of the Satan, and Abel was a son of faith or good man. I mean, in terms that he was faithful to God. So we can see that this enmity that was declared here in Genesis 3:15, it was a real enmity that happens in real life between different people. And very often this enmity happens inside the same family, inside one family. So we can see that Ishmael and Isaac, there are some tensions between them. There are some tensions between Esau and Jacob. There is also enmity. And even their children are born, and there is enmity between the children of Jacob. Some hate, all brothers hate Joseph because he is a favorite son. So do you see this enmity really happened? And sometimes it is not clear who is the offspring of the woman and who is the offspring of the snake. And what is also important, sometimes people can change the camp. So they can be in one camp, and after that they can change to another camp. So do you see, it is really true that in the book of Genesis, the enmity plays a very, very important role. And as I said, there are some enmity, Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. And also a very important question that we will see in the book of Genesis is the question, and again it is related to the promises. Who will inherit the promised blessings? And it starts from the very beginning, but in the beginning it is clear. Yes, so Adam is blessed. So he is the one who took all those blessings. But after the fall, we can see, and we will speak later on about the blessings that were modified, they were transformed a little bit. And after that, again, there is a question, who will inherit the blessings? We have Cain and Abel, but because Abel was killed and Cain cannot inherit it, we can see that the line goes through Seth. After that, we have two lines of patriarchs. We have chapter 5 of the book of Genesis, chapter 4, and it is clear that chapter 5 describe those patriarchs who are the one who inherit the blessing. After that, it came to Noah, and Noah is the one. But Noah has 3 sons, and we will see that the line of Shem is the line of those who inherit the blessing. And finally, it came to Abraham, and Abraham doesn't have children. And in this case, there is a problem because there is nobody who can inherit the promised blessing. Finally, he got a son, Isaac, and Isaac is a heir. After that, we have Jacob. Isaac has 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. And again, there is a question, who will inherit the promised blessing? And we know that it was Jacob, but Esau was the firstborn. And after that, Jacob has 12 children. And again, there is the same question, who will inherit the promised blessing? And we will see later how those blessings were distributed among the sons of Jacob. But this is the most important question that we can see when we read the book of Genesis. And what is also interesting, that the promise is often endangered. So do you see this line of the descendants should never stop, because according to Genesis 3:15, the final one, we understand that this is a messianic text. It should end up with the Messiah. So Messiah should should kill the snake, or the serpent should bruise him at the head. So that is why this line should never stop. But we can see that very often this line is endangered, because Sarah could not have children, Rebecca could not have children, Rachel could not have children. And this shows that the fulfillment of the promise is impossible but by human efforts. But God makes sure that it is fulfilled. So every time when people try to fulfill it or try to make some efforts to do this, it is a disaster. But God always intervenes in order to save the situation. So Abraham gave Sarah to Pharaoh's palace and then to Abimelech's palace. So again, people endangered the fulfillment of the promise. Isaac did the same, and only God's intervention saves the situation. Okay, and now we are approaching to the very, very important question, and this is the question about the genre of the book of Genesis. And I need to tell you that there are many different ideas about the genre of the book of Genesis, and people suggested different definition of the genre. And sometimes, but we need to be very careful, especially when some genres are applied to this book, because it is a very, very critical issue. If some scholars say that it is a kind of a saga or a kind of fiction story, so it implies that the events that are described here is not true. Sometimes people say, especially about the first chapters of the book of Genesis, that it is a kind of parable. But if it is just a parable, it also implies that the events are not true. It's not a historical events, but it is just some symbolic events that symbolize something. So scholars today came to the conclusion that the book of Genesis has a very interesting genre, and this genre can be characterized as a genealogy, or the Hebrew word for this is toledot. And this word toledot is used 10 times in the book of Genesis. And unfortunately, it is not always translated as genealogy in our Bibles. For example, let us read Genesis 2 and verse 4. These are the records of the heavens and the earth concerning their creation. So this is how it is translated in my Bible. And I believe something similar is translated in some of your Bibles. So this is just a records. But the idea is that the word that is used there is toledot. So toledot comes from the root yalat, to give birth. And toledot can be roughly translated as genealogy. So this is a genealogy of the heaven and earth. Genesis 5, this is a genealogy of Adam. Genesis 6:9, this is genealogy of Noah. Genesis 10:1, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, and so on and so forth. So we can see that the repetition of this genealogy, or this word toledot, is very important, and it is it's very important. So, but what is interesting, in Genesis chapter 4, we have the descendants of Cain. But what is interesting, this word toledot is not used when the list of descendants of Cain descendants are mentioned. So there is an impression that Cain has descendants, but he doesn't have a toledot. And it speaks about some interesting implication of this idea of toledot. But before we go to this implication, let us see the structure of the genealogy, or let us try to find some elements that are important to understand the Toledot and how Arthur put everything together. So when we look at chapter 5 of the book of Genesis, we can see that in this chapter, we have the same pattern that is repeated. For example, Adam lived 130 years and fathered a son, Seth. The patriarch lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. All the day of Adam, so Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. All the days of Adam were 930 years and he died. So this is the same pattern, and what we can do, just change the name of the patriarchs and everything is repeated. From one patriarch to another, everything follows the same pattern. But there are some exceptions from this pattern. And the first exception that we can see happened during the life of Enoch, because Enoch didn't die, so there is an exception. And in the Bible, we can see that this is just like a general rule. If we have the pattern of something that is repeated very often, and when there is some exception from this pattern, this is the place when the author wants to emphasize. So the author, for example, wants to emphasize the life of Enoch, that something special happened during his life because he didn't die, so he didn't follow this pattern. But now I would like to pay attention to another detail. Let us go to genealogy of Noah. So we can see that in chapter 5 and verse 32, this genealogy starts, or we can also see 6:9, Genesis 6:9. But we can see the same pattern. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it looks like after that, the genealogy of Noah, or Toledot of Noah, stops, and it doesn't continue. But when we look at Genesis 9 and verse 29, we can see that it looks like this genealogy continues because everything follows the same pattern. All the days of Noah were 950 years and he died. So exactly the same as in this pattern that we see. All the days of Adam were 830 years and he died. So it looks like we have here the beginning of the genealogy. And in the verse Genesis 9:29, we have the end of this genealogy. And what happened in between these two verses? Between these two verses, we can see that there was a story of the flood. So what it means? It means that actually genealogy doesn't stop. It continues. But the story of flood is just incorporated in the genealogy of Noah. So basically, we can say that the author follows the same pattern of genealogy, but when something important happened, something that he wants to emphasize, he just tells this story about this, and after that he continues the genealogy. But this has one more important implication, namely that the entire book of Genesis is a genealogy, or is a Toledot, because one Toledot ends and immediately another one starts. As soon as one ends, another Toledot starts. And all the stories that are written in the book of Genesis just incorporated into one or another Toledot, or one or another genealogy. Is it clear?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So let us look at another example, and this is genealogy of Jacob. And genealogy of Jacob is the same as genealogy of Joseph. These are the generation of Jacob. Joseph being 17 years old, so this is the beginning, Genesis 37 and verse 2. And after that, we can see the story of Joseph. And at the end of the book of Genesis, so Joseph died being 110 years old. So do you see, it looks like all the stories that are written in chapters from 37 up to 50, these are the stories that are incorporated in one Toledot. So what we can say that when one Toledot stops, another Toledot starts. And the entire book of Genesis is one Toledot. And we can say that even this is a kind of a genre of the book of Genesis. The entire book is a Toledot. Okay, now important thing is that Toledot actually should bring to the birth of Messiah, and Toledot should never stop until the birth of Messiah. And what is also important, we can find some parts of Toledots in different places of the Bible. For example, do you remember in the end of the book of Ruth, we have just a small portion of Toledot. And what is also very important, that the New Testament starts with the Toledot of Jesus. And even the beginning almost the same. This is the book of I remember how it is in Greek, but I forgot how it is translated in English. Yeah, in my Bible is just an account of the genealogy. Yeah, almost the same. The book of genealogy of Jesus Christ. This is how it is written in Greek. And so do you see what is interesting? That Toledot appears again in the book of Matthew, just to show that this Toledot continues. Maybe it is not written in the Bible always clearly, but anyway, this Toledot continues, and finally it brings to the birth of the Messiah, And after even the birth of the Messiah, when Jesus was born, Toledot doesn't stop, because it also continues. But after Messiah is born, the condition of entrance into the Toledot is different. If before it was by the right of birth, now, do you remember what is written in the Bible? The Bible said that all of us believe in God, and because we believe in God, we are the sons of Abraham. So do you see, all people are included through the faith into Messiah, are included into this Toledot. And one unusual Toledot that is, by the way, what do you think is one of the, among all those 10 Toledots that are mentioned in the book of Genesis, which one is the most unusual? Okay, let us come back. These are the Toledots. Pardon?
Okay.
But no, Cain doesn't have. Cain is not included into the Toledot. He doesn't have his own Toledot.
Isaac?
Yeah, by the way, I can recommend you a book. It was a kind of a dissertation, but it was published as a monograph. One author analyzed the genealogy formula in Genesis, and he he discusses some very interesting moments about the genealogies. For example, he speaks about main Toledots or main genealogies and secondary ones. For example, here we do not have only the main patriarchs, but we also have some Toledots of Esau, Toledots of Ishmael, and they also have their own Toledots. And he says that there are some Toledots that are main Toledots or main genealogies, and these main genealogies are responsible for some changes in the narrative, some important changes, but some of them are just how to say, secondary genealogies. For example, the genealogy of Isaac is a secondary one because it is related to the fact that Isaac himself is like a transitional figure in the book of Genesis. So I don't want to say that he is not important. He is important, but we can see that most important events happened during the life of Abraham and during the life of Jacob. And during the life of Isaac is just like between these two patriarchs. So that is why some scholars say that Isaac is not like the main figure of the narrative, but he is overshadowed by Abraham on the one hand and Jacob on the other. Okay, so which Toledot is the most unusual here?
Out of Jesus.
But we don't have here Toledot of Jesus. Somebody said Enoch, but here, yes, Enoch is a part of Genesis 5, but I wouldn't say that it is unusual. So do you see the Toledot comes from the root Yalat. Yalat means to give birth. So just a hint.
It is the first one.
Yes. Why do you think the first one?
Because there we don't have who is giving birth to Adam and Eve, but it's the creation of Adam and Eve.
Even the first one, Genesis 2:4, it's not a creation of Adam and Eve, but it is the creation of heaven and earth. The creation of heaven and earth, which is mentioned here in Genesis 2 and verse 4. So how is it possible? How can we apply this to the idea of giving birth? Okay.
Will it be Genesis 5:1?
Pardon?
I'm saying, would it be Genesis 5:1?
Yes, but do you see this is Genesis 2, this is genealogy of heaven and earth. And heaven and earth are not humans. Everybody else in those genealogies are humans. But Genesis 2:4 is not about humans.
No, I'm talking about
I cannot hear
chapter 5, verse 1.
So what about chapter 5, verse 1?
Yeah, because it's talking about the Toledot of Adam, but here it says the day God created Adam. There is no giving birth here, because there is no giving birth. Nobody gave birth to Adam. It's talking about creation.
Okay, yeah.
That is what I'm saying.
Yes.
So that is where the difference comes in. Whereas all of them, somebody begot something, giving birth. In Genesis 5:1, it says God, it talks about God creating Adam, and then it moves on now to the descendants. So that seems to be the odd one out there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this idea. Yes, it's very interesting. Okay, so let us go to the genealogy of heaven and earth. And as I said, this is very unusual Toledot because it is not about humans. It is just about heavens and earth. And there is a question, where is the end of this Toledot? Do you have any clue, any idea? Where is the end of this Toledot? These are the generation, or these are the Toledot of the heavens and the earth.
Maybe the end of this Toledot is Revelation.
Correct. Oh yeah, I don't have a slide here, but we can go to Revelation chapter 21. And in this Revelation chapter 21, so we can read, "Then I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." So what we can see, it's just like the end of the Toledot. These are the generation of the first heavens and the earth, Genesis 2:4. And John saw the new heaven and new earth. So the new descendant, we can say. And what happened to the first heaven and the first earth? They passed away. So this is the end of the Toledot. And here we can see that the idea of Toledot has another very important application. So we can say that the entire Bible is a kind of a Toledot. Yeah. So the entire Bible is a kind of a Toledot or kind of genealogy. And we have these two events, the heavens and earth in the beginning and heavens and earth in the end. And what happened in the middle is just the Toledot of heavens and the earth. And I just want to come back to the idea of Cain, that Cain doesn't have his Toledot. So do you see what is interesting here, that it looks like Toledot is the generations, only those people who are saved are the part of this Toledot, and those people who are not saved, they are not included into the Toledot. So in this case, it can, I don't want to say that it is just like we can prove it on the Bible, in the Bible, but do you see sometimes, especially in the book of Malachi, do you remember there is saying that there is a book that is written before God, and in this book only those people who are saved, you can find the names of the people who are saved. So this is the book of the saved people, and it also somehow reverberates the idea in the book of Revelation. Do you remember one of the plots of the book of generation is that in the beginning of the book, in chapter 4, John saw God sitting on the throne, and God has a book, and the book is sealed with the 7 seals, and nobody is able to open the book until Jesus comes, the Lamb of God, and Jesus opens the seals one by one. And in Revelation chapter 13, we have a very interesting hint about the content of the book. Revelation chapter 13. And verse 8, all those who live on the earth will worship it, everyone whose name was not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slaughtered. So it looks like the book that God was holding in his hand, and the book that nobody was able to open, is the book of life. And that is why John was very much upset when nobody was able to open the book, because if the book is not opened, nobody can be saved. But Jesus, the Lamb of God, comes and he opens the book. And this is the book of life. So it looks like this Toledot has some connection to this book of life. And Cain, when he is evil, because he is evil, he is not the part of the Toledot. He is not included into the Toledot of this king of this book of life. Okay, do you have any questions about that? I see somebody wrote on chat. When was the Toledot of the heaven and earth? What year? Okay, so this is the question about the chronology. Now let us speak about this a little bit later when we speak about the first chapter of the book of Genesis. We can say something about the chronology and how much time and spent, how much time passed from the beginning to the to our time. Okay, so one more. Is the problem general or it is only at my end? So what kind of problem? I don't understand. Okay, so okay, so Pastor Daniel Jaffet, please go ahead. I see you raised your hand.
Yes, sir. Please, could you come again on what happens between the Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, and Revelation chapter 21?
Okay.
What is in between the two Toledots?
Yeah, so this is the same Toledot, but this is the beginning and the end of the Toledot. And what happens in between means the entire story of humanity is in between. So it means that the entire Bible, we can say this is just a Toledot of the heavens and the earth. And the story of the mankind, how we were created, how we were tempted and fell, and how we are redeemed, everything is inside this Toledot. So it looks like the entire Bible is a Toledot, the Toledot of the heavens and earth. And we are included into this Toledot because, do you see, if we believe in Jesus, so we are the sons of Abraham. So we become the sons of Abraham, and we are part of this big Toledot. I hope I answered your question. Okay, so there are several issues on chat. Or the network, the problem with the network. By the way, do you hear me well? Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so any other questions? If you don't have questions, so I just suggest let us make another break now, and we will have the last hour of our lecture for today. Okay, and so let us have a 10 minutes break. And our last presentation for today, we will start it. We'll start it today, and we will finish it. And we'll finish it tomorrow. Yeah, there is a question. So there are two questions. In which language is Toledot? Is it a synonym of genealogy? So Toledot is an Hebrew language, and it comes from the root Yalat, Hebrew root Yalat, which means to give birth. So Toledot we can roughly translate as genealogy. Another question is about the quiz. I see the first quiz after first presentation. What is your guidance in terms of material covered so far? In other words, what material does each quiz cover? So this is the good question. If I'm not mistaken, the first quiz is just based on the first presentation. So this is about the higher criticism of the Pentateuch and about the authorship of the Pentateuch. So nothing else is included into this quiz, only this material. So that is why I just can say that today you are prepared to take this quiz. So you can take it starting from today, because we finished the material about the authorship of the Pentateuch. Any other questions so far? Okay, let us move on. And now we are studying the text itself, and we will come to the first verse of the Bible today. Okay, so before we go to the text, let us discuss some other issues about the book of Genesis. As we saw already, the book of Genesis is usually divided on two parts. The primary prologue, these are chapters from 1 to 11, and stories of patriarchs, chapters 12 to 50. And also we can see that this first part, Genesis 1 to 11, can be presented as two parallel panels. And it also has a very important implication for understanding the Bible. So do you see, we can compare the stories before the flood and the story after the flood. For example, in the beginning we have creation, God speaks to Adam, and at the parallel story flood, God speaks to Noah. After that we have a story about the sons of Adam, and the same story about the sons of Noah. So what is interesting, the first person who is cursed is Cain in the story of Genesis 4. And one of the sons of Noah, to be true, his grandson, Canaan, was cursed. So we can see there are some parallels. And there is a kind of controversy that we can find in Genesis 9 between Ham and other sons. And also we can see that there is an enmity between Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4. After that, we have development of the civilization in the book of, in the first chapter. So we can see that people try to do many different things, and this is described in chapter 4, verses 17 to 26. And again, we have the development of the civilization in chapter 10, when again people are spread across the land and they build cities. Nimrod is mentioned there, and so on and so forth. After that, we have 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and the parallelism is a little bit destroyed here, because we also have, as a deep part, we have 10 generations from Noah to Terah, and we have the story of fall and the story of Nephilim, and again we have the story of fall, the Babylonian tower, the Tower of Babel. So these parallels between two accounts or two panels that describe different events in the book of Genesis, as I said, have a very interesting implication. So it looks like with the Noah is presented in this story, the second Adam, and the Noah, from Noah we can see that there is again the development of the civilization started. But what is important is that after the fall, everything ends with the fall. I mean, everything ends with the sin. We can see the sin in the end of the story of the first antediluvian civilization, and we can see that sin happens in this story of the new civilization. So it looks like sin now is inevitable. Even Noah is presented as the second Adam. Anyway, sin, his story ends with the sin. Okay, so next one. Now let us come to the text of the book of Genesis. And when we come to the very first text of the book of Genesis, you will see that this very first text presents a lot of problems for the translators. I wouldn't say that it has a lot of problems, but there are many ideas about how to translate this text. So traditionally, we translate this text like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So this is, as I said, traditional translation of this text. But starting with the 1960s, I believe, at least I found one article written by our Adventist theologian, Gerhard Hazel. Gerhard Hazel wrote an article in 1970s, in the beginning of 1970s, and he already addressed this issue. So it looks like the issue of the translation of this first verse of the Bible is a little bit older. So starting from, I believe, 1960s, new ideas about the translation of the text appeared. And okay, let me highlight this one. Actually, there are 3 or even 4 ways how we can translate the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, when God created the heaven and earth, the earth was formless and void. Or the same way we can say, in the beginning of God's creation, the earth was formless and void. So what is the difference between this translation, in the beginning God created, or in the beginning when God created, or in the beginning of God's creation? So if we speak, if we speak from the grammatical point of view, we see that the first sentence here became a temporal clause subordinated to the main clause in verse 2. So if the traditional translation says, in the beginning God created, this translation says, in the beginning when God created, or in the beginning of God's creation, the earth was formless and void. So this is the one way how we can translate this text, to make it as a temporal clause which is subordinated to the main clause in verse 2. Another way I forgot to include it. Another way how we can translate it, I will add one more slide to this presentation. Another way how we can translate it is to make verse number 1 as a temporal clause which is subordinated to the main clause in verse 3, not verse 2, but in verse 2 to verse 3. And verse 2 is a kind of a sentence, what is it called? Okay, let me read how we can translate it, and I believe you will understand it. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the watery deeps, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. God said. So do you see, we can just omit verse 2 as just explanation, and the verse 1 is the temporary clause. In the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, God said, "Let there be light." So this translation when the first verse is a temporary clause and the third verse is the main clause, was first proposed by Ibn Ezra, and it's very difficult for me to explain to you the reasons why this translation is technically possible, because we need to know some Hebrew grammar. But what Okay, let me try to do it. Okay, just. Okay, I will just make a whiteboard. And I will copy. So can you see the whiteboard?
Yes.
I don't know how deep your knowledge of Hebrew language. So, but I will try to explain to you the idea of this translation. So, Bereshit, this is in the beginning. Bara, this is he created. So, Elohim is God. So, the traditional translation is in the beginning, God created. In Hebrew language, they usually put the verb at the first place in the beginning. So that is why the subject, not as in English, just follows the verb. So in the beginning, God created. But you understand very well that in Hebrew, in the original text, there was no oops. Okay, there was no vowels. We had only the consonant text. And what they suggest to do, oops. What they suggest to do is just to vocalize it a little bit different, this text. And in this case, it could have a different meaning. So Bereshit, they noticed that it doesn't have an article. So there is no article with this word Bereshit. And the absence of article can say that Bereshit can be dependent on the next word bara. But in this case, to make it dependent on the next word bara, bara cannot be a finite verb, but it should be in the form of infinitive construct. So infinitive construct is the equivalent, roughly we can say that this is equivalent of English gerund, and we can translate it as a noun that is formed from the verb. So in the beginning of creation, or in the beginning of God's creation. Okay, so they translate it like this: in the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth, the earth was void and empty. So this is the idea behind this translation. Technically, this translation is possible because of course we can put just a little bit different vowels. Anyway, the vowels were added by the Masoretes, and this is their interpretation of the text. And it is possible to vocalize text differently using different vowels. And that is why these translations appeared. So the most common translation is translation traditional one, and in the most of the Bibles you can find it. So they translate it as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, as an independent sentence. But there are some translations that utilize this new way of translating, and they translate it as subordinate clause. As a subordinate clause. And the most popular translation among those is that we treat verse 1 as a temporal clause subordinated to verse number 3. Subordinated to verse number 3. So in the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, and verse 2 is just a parenthetical sentence. We can just, it is just explained, but it is not the main sentence. In the beginning, when God created the heaven and the earth, God said, let there be light. So this is one of the most popular translation now. And for example, if I'm not mistaken, Jewish Publication Society Bible or translation defend this translation, and some other, in some other Bibles you can find the same treatment of the first verse. And now, of course, I just can see that you may ask a question. Okay, but what is the difference? What is the difference between the traditional translation and this translation when the verse 1 is treated as a temporal clause? So how can we explain the difference between these two translations? And it looks like the difference is not very big, but in fact, it is very, very essential. And the difference is, just let us listen to the sound of the text. In the beginning of God's creation, the heaven was void and empty. So what does it mean? In the beginning of God's creation, the earth, in the beginning of God's creation of the heaven and earth, the earth was void and empty.
It might mean that God was creating out of what already was existing.
Exactly, correct. So this variance, when the verse 1 is treated as a temporal clause, implies that God didn't create out of nothing, but he created from the existing material. So in the beginning of God's creation, earth had already existed, and God just took the earth and he just did some manipulation of this earth. And in such a way, our world came into existence. So you made a very, very good point because of regarding the difference in those translations. And among our modern scholars, there are many people who defend this idea of translation of the text, verse 1, as a temporal clause. But what I would like to say, in fact, this translation is not natural. So in order to translate it like this, we need to make a lot of changes in the words. And for example, for the word bara, is not so natural to stand as an infinitive construct, and the translation as just finite verb he created is more fluent and more natural, I would like to say like this. So that is why it is unlikely that the author Moses wanted to say that in the beginning, to say that it is a temporal clause. So he had an intention to translate it as a temporal clause. Okay, is it clear? I understand that this material is not a very easy one, because we use some grammar, Hebrew grammar, and I understand that not all of you are familiar with the Hebrew grammar very well, or you can forget it. Is it clear?
Yes, Prof.
Okay.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah, it's okay.
Also, there is another way how people treat the first verse, and they treat it as a summary or like a title of the entire chapter. And in this case, they treat heaven and earth as a merism, and merism is a literally device. This is a literally device which implies, so for example, when we took two opposite things and we described the whole by using two opposite parts of this whole. I will give you several examples, like for example, day and night. When we speak day and night, we do not mean separately day and separately night, but we mean something whole by referring to the parts which are opposite to each other. Or for example, when we say young and old, this is another example of merism. So when we speak young and old, we do not mean just only young and only old, but we mean everything, everybody who is between young and old are included, everybody is included in this expression young and old. And in this case also, some people say that heaven and earth is a merism. So we don't need to treat them separately as God created heaven and earth. But in this case, it means that God created everything. So everything that on heaven and everything that is on earth. Okay, so yes, somebody said that it is not very clear because you don't know Hebrew. So in this course, I will try to explain everything as clear as possible without going to Hebrew grammar very often. But in some cases, it will be impossible because, do you see, the interpretation of the text will require us to go to the Hebrew grammar and to understanding of some of the issues that is connected with the Hebrew grammar. Okay, somebody raised a hand. Pastor David. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Since we are talking about the first verse, the English translation says, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yes.
So the word the heavens, is that the actual translation from the original text? And if that is it, how many heavens were created?
Okay, yes, so this is a good question. Thank you very much for it. In Hebrew language, the word heaven sounds like shamayim, and im is always a suffix, is a plural suffix, im. But this is also ayim. It's not just a plural suffix, but it is a dual suffix, because you will study later on that in Hebrew they have not only plural form of the noun, but they have also a dual form of the noun. For example, if you have parts of the body, paired parts of the body, like eyes, hands, legs, so they use this dual form for these parts of the body. But what is also interesting, that the word shamayim can be presented as consisting of two parts, mayim and sha and mayim. And mayim in Hebrew is water. Mayim is water. And most probably you can immediately remember what Apostle Peter says in his epistle, and he said that the first heaven and earth were made of water, and that is why the first world was destroyed with the water. Yeah, and so there are some interesting connection that we can find in the word shamayim. So that is why, because it is like a dual form, we can imply that shamayim has like two levels or something like two. But in fact, we cannot treat this word like this because the Bible doesn't tell us anything about this. And I agree that to some extent we can understand this phrase, heaven and earth, as a merism. So it means that God created everything. And this verse says that in the beginning, God created everything. And the earth was void and empty. Okay. So we shouldn't treat this verse as the word shamayim or the word heaven as indicated on how many heavens, but most probably we can say that this verse means that God created everything. So God created heaven and earth. It means he created everything in the beginning. Did I answer your question?
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so but do you see, we cannot say that the first verse was just a summary. Why? And because it was not an ancient tradition to start the book or anything with a title or with a summary. Even if we look at some other texts of ancient texts, like for example, Enuma Elish. This is a Babylonian story of creation. We never see that the book starts with the title or the book starts with the summary. It is true even when we look at the New Testament books. So the title, for example, the Gospel of Matthew, was added just later, but in the original text there was no any title attached to the book. So that is why it is not likely to treat this verse as a summary. Okay, there is another question on the chat. Okay, somebody gave a definition of merism. Thank you very much. Merism, Latin merismus, Greek merismos, is a rhetorical device or figure of speech in which a combination of two contrasting parts of the whole refer to the whole. For example, in order to say that someone searched everywhere, one could say, use the merism, search high and low. Thank you very much for this example. Yeah, it's really helpful. And by the way, we will sometimes we will go to such technical terms like merism, Hemdiadis, and some other literary device. And every time when we go to them, I will explain to you what it means. So thank you very much for this comment. Okay, so yes, if you go back to our first text, I mentioned Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is also used as one of the arguments why some scholars try to translate the first verse as a temporal clause, because they believe that Moses took a lot from this Babylonian epic of creation. We will speak about it a little bit later. And because they believe that they don't believe in Moses, but they believe that the author of the book of Genesis borrowed a lot of things from these Babylonian epics. So that is why they say that there are some parallels here. And Enuma Elish, if we translate it literally, means when so it starts as a temporal clause. When on high, God created something like this. So because of that, they also use Enuma Elish as an additional argument in favor of this translation. But let us make a conclusion from this discussion. And so the traditional translation of the text, I mean, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, is the most natural translation. And this is the easiest way how we can understand the text. Other ways of understanding the text are very sophisticated, and it is not likely that the author intended such kind of very difficult construction in order to convey a very simple idea. So that is why this traditional interpretation of the text is the most natural one. Okay, so another important issue that we can find in this Genesis 1:1 or 1:2 is the state of the earth, because the phrase "the earth." Okay, so what is this? Okay, now we will speak about two theories, and one of them became very, very popular, and this theory got a name, gap theory. Gap theory, and gap theory implies, by the way, in our days we need to differentiate two gap theories. One is active gap theory and another one is passive gap theory. So today probably we will finish with the active gap theory, and tomorrow we will start with the passive gap theory. So what is this theory about? This way of translation, this text, by the way, why are those versions are very, very important, or what significance they have? We need to understand that all those ways of translation the text are somehow related to the theory of evolution. I mean that they try to reconcile somehow the theory of evolution with with what is written in the Bible. Because do you see, the theory of evolution says that our Earth is very ancient, so it's like billions of years old. And if the matter existed even before God started the creation, there is no problem if evolution says that our Earth is very old. So this is one of the implications. And this is active gap theory also appeared in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, as a kind of a way to reconcile the story of creation with the theory or hypothesis of evolution. And again, we need to address the Hebrew text, because the Bible says, now the earth was formless and empty. And the word that is used here is was, and this is the Hebrew verb haya. And in Hebrew, this is a very, very interesting language, because they don't have a perfective form of the verb. So it means that we can translate the verb haya like it was, and we can translate it as become. The earth became formless and void. And so let me explain it with a clear language. So what they say: in the beginning God created, this is active gap theory. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but the earth became formless and void. And here we need to pay attention to another phrase that is used here, and this is the phrase tohu vavohu. Tohu vavohu, or sometimes they say tohu vabohu, so this is the same. And tohu vavohu, some scholars again try to draw some parallels with the Babylonian epics of creation, Enuma Elish. Excuse me. And in the Babylonian epic of creation, there is a goddess, and her name is Tiamat. And Tiamat is a goddess, Babylonian goddess of the ocean. And this Tiamat is the god of the salt ocean, because they had like two oceans, freshwater ocean and salt ocean. And they describe the creation as mixing up of the waters of these two oceans. So when they mix up the waters, from those waters something appeared. And this Tiamat is very much associated with the house. And Tiamat, they find some similar sound with the Tiamat, with the word Tohu. That is why they say that this Tiamat and that the expression Tohu Vavohu is an expression that describes the primordial house that existed. So that is why they understand this phrase Tohu Vavohu as a house. And this is related to this Babylonian myth. So when they describe it like this, this is the active gap theory. God created in the beginning the heavens and the earth, but the earth became formless and void. So the earth became a house. And this is the slide that explains or describes very well this active gap theory. The proponents of this active gap theory just imagine what is not written in the Bible. So what they say, in the beginning, God created the original earth, and the original earth was perfect, and there was nothing bad in this original earth. But after that, between verse 1 and verse 2 and verse 3, something happened. And what happened? Satan was cast down to the earth. So he came to the earth. And when Satan came to this earth that was perfectly created by God, he made this earth a house. So he turned this earth into a house. And what God did, he starts the new creation, the new creational week, just to repair what Satan did and to fix what was the consequences of this Satan's fall. So this is the active gap theory, and I just want to emphasize again, it is based on the translation of the verb haya, so they translate it as become. The earth became formless and void, and they understand Tohu Vavohu as a house, and they of course made up a story about Satan who fell down on the earth just between verse 1 and verse 3, and they say that there was a gap, and this gap between verse 1 and verse 2, and between these verses Satan came down on the earth, and that is why earth became a house, became empty and void. So is it clear?
Wow.
But of course it is a false theory.
That's it.
So this is a false theory, and it is based on some imagination, because the Bible never says about the gap between verse 1 and verse 2. But if you even Google the expression gap theory and creation gap theory, you will find a lot of information about this gap theory. Even if I'm not mistaken, there is an article in Wikipedia that tells us about this gap theory and all the details of this active gap theory. So why it became so popular? Maybe you remember the Bible with the commentary, Scofield's Bible. Have you ever come across the Scofield's Bible?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So before Scofield published this Bible, there was a kind of agreement between Bible publishers that they will not add to the Bible any commentary. But Scofield, it looks like he was the first one who attached to the text of the Bible some explanations or some commentaries. And Schofield was the adherent of this theory. So he included the commentary, in his commentary, the story about this Satan fell down to the earth between verse 1 and verse 2. And because it was the first Bible with the commentaries, it became very, very popular. So it was published by millions of copies. And because of that, this theory of active gap theory was popularized very much. Schofield, by the way, was also the one who popularized dispensationalism, because dispensationalism was not very popular in the 19th century. But after Schofield added some ideas of dispensationalism in his Bible, it just became very, very, very popular. So, okay, so this is the active gap theory. But as I said, this theory is based just on people's imagination, because nowhere in the Bible we can find any hint that between verse 1 and verse 2 of the creation account there was a gap and Satan came down to the earth just in this period of time. So we cannot find it anywhere else in the Bible. That is why this theory is based mostly on people's imagination and the wrong translation of the verb haya. Also, it is based on the wrong understanding of the phrase tohu vavohu, because tohu vavohu doesn't mean house, and we will speak about it. We'll speak about it tomorrow. Okay. Any questions? Do you have any questions? Yes. Please, Pastor Banda.
Prof. So are we saying that the idea of the active gap theory is based on a premise of championing evolution and then using materials like the Babylonian theories brought into the text to just champion this idea of evolution? So
correct. So one of the ideas of this theory was just to reconcile somehow the idea of evolution with the biblical account of creation. Because in this case, we see if there is a gap, we can somehow accommodate all the ages that evolution speaks about into this gap.
Thank you.
And also, I might be wrong. I don't remember exactly now, but maybe one more implication of this theory, that all those layers, geological layers, they can also explain with this theory. So in this case, we don't know how much this gap was, and Saturn could destroy everything, so that everything, all these geological layers were formed during the activity of Saturn on the Earth. But conservative scholars today try to explain all those layers as the activity of flood, not as this destruction of the Earth made by Saturn. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so if you don't have, yes, Pastor Victor.
This gap theories, how does it affect our the 6-day creation of the world? Because I'm seeing we are just in verse 1. We haven't even reached verse 3.
Yeah.
And it looks like there is a big gap.
Mm-hmm. So as I said, in this case, how the thinking of the people who are adherents of this theory. So they say that there was, by the way, most of them, they believe in 6-day creation, but 6 days creation started a little bit later. But in the beginning, God created the world. What was perfect, everything was good. But when Satan came, he destroyed everything. And everything what evolution says could be accommodated in this period of time. So that is why one of the implications of this active gap theory was somehow to reconcile the theory of evolution and the biblical account of creation. Yes, but I said this is not the true story because we don't have any support of the story in the Bible. But tomorrow we will speak about the passive gap theory. And the passive gap theory, so this active gap theory, I just explain it to you so that you can have an idea of this theory. And it is not related very much to our church and to our theology. But next theory that we will speak about tomorrow is the so-called passive gap theory. And this passive gap theory is very much related to our doctrines. And if you remember, about 7 years ago, we had a Sabbath School quarterly about creation, if you remember. So about 7, maybe 6 or 8, I don't remember exactly. But we
did some years back.
Yes, we had a quarterly on this. And I remember, I don't know about your context, at that time I was back in Ukraine. And I remember there was a great controversy among the church members about the idea that was presented in this quarterly. And actually this quarterly said about the passive gap theory, which is called passive gap theory. So tomorrow we will speak about this, and we will speak about some arguments that it is really possible. But let us go to this issue tomorrow, because today our time is almost over. Any other questions?
Prof?
Yes.
Mine is not on the lesson. It's just question on the administrative side of things.
Okay.
Can I ask?
Sure.
All right. I wanted to just check how soon after the lesson are you able to upload the videos, number one. Number two, with regard to the other colleagues who have not been able to attend yesterday and today, how can we help? I don't know. You mentioned that you're worried and concerned about them.
Yes.
If maybe we had a list, and then if we know some of them, then we can just reach out and find out what is the problem.
Yes. So regarding the first question, so what I do, I record. I understood that it is better if I record not to the cloud, because before we just recorded it to the cloud. But if you make a record to the cloud, in half a year, they keep the record about half a year, and after that it disappears. So they just delete it. That is why what I now do, I record to my computer, and after I have recorded to my computer, I upload it to my to my YouTube account. And after that, I give you a link from the YouTube. So you can, at any moment, you can go back and you can watch the video through YouTube. And I believe it is much easier for you because YouTube is very like a common way people use it. So that is why I need about some time, because the video should be converted, and after that it should be uploaded to the YouTube. But what I usually do every day, I upload and I publish a link to the YouTube video on the Moodle. So you can find it. And yesterday's video is already there, so you can have access to it. So regarding, thank you for reminding about those people who are not part of the class. And so today, after we finish the class, I'm going to go to Mrs. Peris Kimani, who's an officer in admission office, and I will try to understand what is going on with the other people who are not present in our class and how we can reach them. And so what is the problem, why they are not with us? Maybe they didn't get a link or whatever, I don't know. But we sent the link to everybody, and because we sent the link to everybody, maybe they don't have access to our AUA account, but they are silent, and I just want to find out what is going on with them. Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, yes, Prof. Yeah, okay. But more or less, how many are we supposed to be in class?
Well, I got a list of 32 people.
Oh, okay.
So, but now we have 19, so about like 12 people or 13 people are somewhere lost some.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. Pastor Sarindra Harivola.
Question concerning the quiz. I don't know if I understand, but we are free to do the quiz in the time
Yes.
that we want.
Yes. So quizzes, all the quizzes are will be administrated through Moodle. So I will not have quizzes during the class. And now, because not all of the people, because of this turbulence now, and not all of the people joined the class from the very beginning, I just want to be sure that everything's okay with them, and that is why I don't put the cut-off date for the quiz. So that is why since yesterday, it seems to me, it is opened, and you can do it. And as I said, you are already prepared for the quiz number 1. So all the information regarding this quiz was already given to you. You can just need to study presentation number 1, and you can do your quiz at any moment, at any time. But just remember that the time for the quiz is limited. So you cannot just start doing it and do it as long as you want. You will have just limited time, and as soon as you start your quiz, the time counter is on, and it will stop. It will stop, it seems to me, in 25 minutes. I don't remember. So somebody says, I have a colleague who is supposed to be here. He intentionally dropped the program because of fees constraints. Okay, okay. Let's reach out to all and get to know why they aren't here. Yes, please, if you have some friends and you know that they are supposed to be here, but they are not, please get in touch with them. I will appreciate it. And from my end, I will also try to do my best to reach them. Okay, I see Pastor Angel Chipulu. You have a question.
Yes, Prof. Mine is not really a question. I joined a little bit late yesterday, and I missed some other few components. So I was requesting that after everyone has exited, I remain briefly with you, maybe for 10 minutes, and just appreciate 1 or 2 things.
Okay. Okay, no problem with this. Any other questions? No questions? Okay, so tomorrow we will meet at the same time, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
May I just ask that
yes,
the quiz is on presentation 1?
Yes.
Is on presentation number 1.
Yes.
All
correct.
right. Thank you.
Yes. And I also have a request for you. May I ask somebody to prepare a short devotion for tomorrow? Anybody would like to volunteer? Any?
I can prepare tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much, Pastor Victor. And Pastor
Yes, Prof.
Or may I ask you just to prepare a list of the students so that we can share this devotion, so that all of us can participate in the devotion?
I will do that, Prof. I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, and see you tomorrow. So let us pray. Let us pray. Our dear Heavenly Father, we would like to thank you again and again for your mercies, for your love to us, and for this opportunity for us to study your word. And now please help us to come through all these many theories that we emerged recently, and many of them unfortunately are not true, and help us to see the truth, and help us to practice this truth in our lives, so that we can be closer to you, and it can help us to grow in your wisdom, to grow in understanding your will, and to be your sons and daughters. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, God bless you. So you can be
Bless you
dismissed.
too.
Yes.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
God
And
bless you.
I will stay here, and if somebody needs to talk to me, you can talk.
Thank you, Prof.